The US designed today's global free trade system, but what it ran into is what we call the Triffin dilemma. The Triffin dilemma is what happens when a country uses its own currency as the global reserve currency. When the US dollar became the global reserve currency through Bretton Woods, it means that countries were incentivized to hoard US dollars in their treasuries because it had the value, right? Their currency was pegged to the US dollar's value. And what this did is that it made the US dollar very strong and very expensive. And this was really good for US consumers, right? Because the US consumers were able to benefit from cheap imports from other countries, and their dollar was stronger, so they had more purchasing power. But when it comes to a trade deficit, what it leads to is that the US has to import more goods than it is exporting, simply because the dollar is so expensive. If we just think about it really like simplistically, if a poor country is, let's say, exporting, I don't know, like soybeans to the US, well, they're going to be able to sell it to the US and the US can buy it because that local currency is cheap compared to the US dollar. But it doesn't work the other way around. Poor countries can't buy much of US exports because the US dollar is much more expensive than their local currency. An imbalance where the countries around the world demand more US dollars, but the US is not able to maintain its manufacturing power because it's now buying cheap imports. And so what happens is that you lead to this dilemma where there's too much demand for US dollars, but there's not enough gold to back it up. In 1971, we see the Nixon shock. The Nixon shock was President Nixon declaring the US dollar will no longer be pegged to gold anymore. This is how they tried to overcome this dilemma. But what it did is that it now ushered in a new type of economic instability. This led to the 1980s, which is marked by neoliberalism and President Reagan and Margaret Thatcher's design for a new world order.